Story 1. My father passed away when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and then my older brother passed away when I was around 6 or 7. At that time, I understood that people die and that it's a normal part of life. However, reflecting on it now, I realize that coming to terms with the inevitability of death at such a young age might not have been typical. Story 2. I never received any hugs from my parents or valuable advice. Not even when I cried or was hurt physically. Comfort was quite absent too. I only realized a few years ago when I saw a 17-year-old leaning against his dad and telling him about his struggles with an upcoming big decision. I never had that level of support and comfort, and it still makes my eyes water when I think about it in weak moments. Story 3. Thinking that I was inherently a mean, evil, broken person at the age of 8 or 9. When I watched Inside Out 2, it honestly shocked me that Riley believed she was inherently a good person. Story 4. Being told to stop crying or I will give you something to cry about. Like emotional suppression unlocked at age 5. Story 5. It turns out they just wanted me to be silent and have no opinion or feelings. My mother and stepfather used to constantly say I was mouthy and always talked back. Well, how else am I supposed to communicate? Smoke signals? Story 6. My mother yelled at me when I was hurt or sick instead of being nurturing. She has anxiety and does not handle stressful situations well. This has led me to crave a lot of sympathy and attention when I am sick as an adult. Story 7. Having my hair chopped off because I wasn't taking care of it to my mother's standards. I was 6 and had very long, curly hair. Of course, I struggled to take care of it. Story 8. There is a difference between normal sibling fighting and abuse. I always thought the things that happened to me were normal sibling dynamics and would even tell friends they were the unusual ones when their experiences were different. After going to therapy, I shared a little story. My therapist said, "That's called torture." Story 9. Waking up one morning to find my guinea pig gone was overwhelming, especially after I struggled to understand some of her behavior and started expressing my concerns. I suspected my father had put her outside, leaving her vulnerable to predators. I remained silent, knowing it wouldn't have made a difference to him. Later, I felt immense guilt, believing that if I had just kept quiet, she might have been safe. Story 10. My only childhood best friend did not genuinely care about me, even though she pretended to. It seemed normal at the time, but it has caused me significant trust issues in my life. While it may not have been traumatic, it has impacted me greatly. Story 11. Really mild, but my pulse still shoots up whenever I hear my mother walk or breathe heavily. That's what she did before what we called a cleaning rampage, during which she angrily and bitterly cleaned my little sister's messes while blaming me and my older sister for it. I used to dig through the trash to retrieve my things that she threw away because she disliked clutter and thought I wouldn't even notice. I thought I was a bad, messy kid. It turns out she had impossible standards for cleanliness with 4 little kids running around, and she is much happier now that she has accepted she cannot maintain that. Story 12. I wouldn't say I'm traumatized by it, but I realized I'm a people pleaser because my father never showed me that he was proud of me when I was younger. His attitude toward my achievements led me to believe they were expectations rather than things to be proud of. It was an internal conflict I struggled with throughout my teenage years and into my early 20s. But I'm glad to say I've been working on it since recognizing the root cause of my people-pleasing behaviors. Story 13. Every time I experienced knee pain and told my mom I wanted to see a doctor, I would always hear, "You think that's bad? Do you want to hear about all my problems?" That was until my cartilage broke off and was floating around under my skin by the time I reached high school. Story 14. Pretty much my entire childhood, it was not normal to be at the pub until closing time on a school night with local alcoholics helping me with my homework. It was not normal to be kicked out of the pub and taken to a complete stranger's house so they could continue drinking. It was not normal to beg your mother while crying to turn the music down so you could get some sleep. It was not normal for the kids at school to push you down the stairs or follow you home, throwing rocks and trash at you. Most kids did not have to wake themselves up for school, skipping breakfast because you could not reach the cereal, then carefully picking your way past needles, glass, and human waste to get out of the estate so you could get there. Story 15. When my father was angered by my brother and me, he would take his leather belt and whip us across the backs of our legs. He also pulled my ears and hair a lot when I was a child. He was quite unpleasant. Now, he sits at home alone because no one wants to socialize with him. Story 16. I fell asleep under my bed instead of in it because it felt safer down there, and I wasn't allowed to wake my parents if I was scared. Story 17. Getting teased or made fun of for liking certain things as a young child was challenging. My older sister often teased me for the TV shows I liked to watch and made fun of my drawings when I created my own Pokemon, for example. The same thing happened at school. I still remember every instance in detail. To this day, I don't like to share my passions with people and suppress strong displays of positive emotions around others. Story 18. It was winter. One of our barn cats had gotten into a bad fight with some kind of animal, and it became clear it wasn't going to make it. I came in, distressed, telling my mom this poor cat couldn't move and was nearly frozen behind the garage, struggling to breathe and drooling pus from badly infected wounds on its face and neck. She put a single shell in the shotgun, handed it to me, and told me my dad wasn't home, so I would need to take care of it. I believe it was kinder that way, but it was still difficult. It looked at me before I pulled the trigger. Story 19. I don't know if traumatized is the right word, but it felt like nobody expected anything good from me. Growing up, I was always told, "You're not ready," or "How are you going to be able to handle that?" Especially regarding big dreams or life milestones. I was often told I'd never be ready to drive or keep a job, yet those same people were the ones who prevented me from achieving those things. It really affected my self-esteem, and it is still nearly impossible for me to pursue things that feel too significant. Story 20. Being told we have nowhere to live at the end of the month is distressing. Everything we have is secondhand and carries the scent of others, making it hard to feel settled. As if we are in a stranger's house with unfamiliar bedding and clothing. This is the reality of true poverty. Do not have children if you cannot provide a good life for them. Story 21. Being told that a boy trying to kiss or touch me in school and making me very uncomfortable and scared was just because he had a crush on me. Story 22. My mom would go into intense cleaning frenzies, and you would get yelled at if you didn't start cleaning along with her. As soon as you heard the vacuum, you knew she would be in a terrible mood, and your day would be ruined. Whenever my partner vacuums, I feel really upset regardless of how many times she assures me she is not mad. Story 23. Being spanked with a leather belt while doubled over was a painful experience. I had broken yardsticks and wooden spoons, so they had to find something else. I don't even remember what I did wrong. I know I was considered a bad kid, but I honestly don't remember doing anything wrong. Story 24. Being raised in an environment where any first attempts at doing anything were expected to be perfect, without a source to learn from, led to significant challenges. I was always expected to be on call to fix anything and everything, again without guidance. At the same time, help was refused every time I asked for it. The notion that children should be seen but not heard, and we are raising adults, not kids, was prevalent. As a result, only 2 of the 8 siblings maintain any interaction with our parents. Story 25. Always receiving constructive criticism instead of praise. Draw a picture? That looks strange. You should fix the eyes on that. Create a painting? You chose odd colors. I wouldn't have done it that way. Achieve a 95% on a school project? Why didn't you get 100%? This led to people-pleasing tendencies, making me feel like nothing I do is enough. I'm an adult, married to a man who believes I radiate positivity, yet I still often feel that my best isn't good enough. Story 26. My father left a handprint on my face. He hit me 3 times with a belt or wooden paddle, just out of suspicion. Story 27. My mother sometimes locked my sister and me out of the house during the summer if she was in one of her moods. If we needed to use the bathroom, we were hesitant to knock on the door for permission. As kids, that was just how it was. As adults, we now wonder what was that about. Story 28. The sexual and violent aspects were clear. However, I did not understand that emotional abuse is a real issue. When I was 11, my mother threatened to kill herself and me, along with other troubling behaviors. I did not realize that such actions are also not what parents are supposed to do. Story 29. Being told that my mom, dad, and I couldn't leave my uncle's house after a family dinner until I gave my uncle a kiss on the cheek. Story 30. I wasn't allowed to complain or express frustration about my experiences because someone in my family had it worse at my age. Story 31. I was told to eat everything on my plate, regardless of whether I was still hungry. Now, I have no idea when I am full unless I am overly full. Story 32. Anytime I mentioned something my mother did that I didn't like or felt uncomfortable with, I was told it never happened. In fact, she still does it. This has really affected my memory because I now have a hard time remembering what actually happened, what I was told happened, and what I was told didn't happen. They are all somewhat mixed up in my mind. Story 33. My mom took me to a juvenile detention center at age 12, where the warden threatened to lock me up because I wouldn't do my homework. It wasn't until I shared that story with a friend and saw her reaction that I realized how serious it was. Story 34. Being made fun of when you go to a parent with an uncomfortable situation can be difficult. I was at a sleepover, and another girl wanted to play house by lying on top of me. I felt so uncomfortable that I wanted to go home, and afterwards, my mom teased me for it. I never went to her with my feelings again. Story 35. Unintentionally traumatic. They are just bullying you because they are jealous of how smart or pretty you are. Oh great, make me feel ashamed of my positive traits, and it's my fault for being bullied for existing. Win-win. Story 36. Not wanting to wake my dad from his naps. Learning to distinguish people's footsteps from one another. Being highly sensitive to others' emotions or perceived feelings, which can impact my own mood. Being sensitive to rejection is another challenge I face. Another major trigger for me is being prevented from leaving or being grabbed. It really activates my fight or flight response. Growing up means recognizing that you carry burdens from having emotionally immature parents, especially when one of them has depended on you to regulate their emotions, despite you being a child. Thank you, Dad. Story 37. Some of the top comments already mentioned silent treatment, but I will add invalidation to that. Coming home and sharing something that happened and is bothering you, like a fight with your friend, and your parents responding with, "Why are you so upset over that? It isn't the end of the world. Now stop crying and get over it," makes it difficult. To this day, I struggle with feeling like a burden if I share anything but positive news and have a hard time opening up and asking for support. Another issue is impossible standards. I was grounded if I didn't receive a passing grade, even though I tried hard in subjects like calculus but just didn't understand the material. I would cry, saying I did my best, and the reply would be, "I guess your best isn't good enough." I would happily share that I received a B on an assignment, only to be met with, "Well, I heard your friend got an A. How is that? She is less capable than you, so were you slacking off?" Nothing was ever enough. My room was never considered clean enough, and grades were only acceptable if I had the highest in the class. It creates children who experience severe burnout in their late 20s and are constantly anxious about meeting expectations. Story 38. This is different from some of the other responses. I was constantly told that I was the best, the smartest, and the prettiest, that I could do no wrong, and that the world was mine for the taking. Throughout my childhood, conflicts with other kids were always their fault. If something did not go my way, it was due to some unjust conspiracy and not any flaws in me. Coming to terms with the reality of those beliefs was a process, and I will always feel sorrow for the people I hurt before I truly understood and developed realistic humility. I know my parents were trying their best, but their approach created a narcissist. Story 39. My mom used to lock me in a car seat in a closet when I misbehaved. I became so accustomed to it that I would walk to the closet and wait to be locked in when I got in trouble. My family would tell this story as if it were funny, but I didn't realize how problematic it was until my wife heard about it. Story 40. My father broke my belongings as a punishment. It happened twice that I can vividly remember, when I was 4 or 5 and again when I was 7 or 8. The first instance involved my favorite VHS tape, Oliver and Company. I watched it daily at least once. He tore the film out right in front of me and threw it on the ground. The second instance was a metal tray I had for years. I ate all my meals on it, played with modeling clay on it, and loved it. He broke it and bent it in front of me, then made me throw it in the dumpster afterward. A couple of years ago, my son accidentally knocked over a small ceramic decorative statue I had purchased in high school, which I had for more than 10 years, and broke it. I wasn't angry with him, but it made me very upset. I cried and felt panicked. My husband didn't understand, and I didn't either until that moment when I felt the same way I did as a child when my father broke my belongings. I am very protective of my items and knickknacks. My husband now spends his time meticulously fixing anything of mine that gets cracked or broken and is very careful with my possessions. It has been very healing to receive that kind of consideration. Story 41. I was in college when I realized a father-daughter relationship didn't have to be toxic and sad. One of my friends from college told me her dad was picking her up for the weekend. I lived in a nearby town and asked if I could get a ride. They agreed. On the ride home, my friend and her dad were talking, just having a normal conversation about anything. That's when it hit me that what my dad and I had wasn't normal at all. Conversations with my dad were filled with yelling, screaming, or berating me, or there would just be silence. There was never a normal conversation. Story 42. I thought everyone got asked out at the punchline to a joke they weren't in on at least once in their childhood. Turns out no one I know experienced that at all, just me, and I lost count of how many times it happened. Story 43. I avoided looking at my parents in our small house because of how frightening they appeared and behaved under the influence of pills and alcohol. I refrained from looking into their bedroom, fearing they might be lying there dead. Story 44. I wasn't allowed to be angry about things. I'm not sure how I internalized that lesson, but it was likely through observing how my siblings' anger was treated. It has taken me decades to unlearn that. Story 45. I had to pretend I had a terrible time every time I went out with friends, or else my mom would find extra chores for me. It's strange when mothers are jealous of their daughters. Story 46. Having emotionally volatile parents does a lot of damage. When children cannot predict their parents' moods, it leads to heightened threat-scanning behavior and people-pleasing tendencies. These patterns contribute to significant self-esteem and burnout issues later in adulthood. Parents, as a therapist, I urge you to be more emotionally consistent with your children. Stop behaving like children regarding this matter. I have seen many adults feeling jealous and angry towards their own children because the kids take attention away from them with their partners. It's a complicated situation. Please establish boundaries. Your children are not your therapist. Story 47. In high school, I experienced my first boyfriend pressuring me into sexual activity at the age of 14. He would become angry or give me the silent treatment if I refused. I now understand that it was a form of rape that affected me for years. I had very little self-worth and didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. I'm still struggling with it. Jamie, I hope you face the consequences you deserve. Story 48. Learning to be quiet. Not inside voices quiet, but children should be seen and not heard quiet. I learned all the squeaky spots in the floorboards to avoid them. I learned how to shut doors silently and avoided crunchy foods because the sound of chewing irritated my dad. I learned how to sob without making noise. All normal things for a child to learn by the age of 10, right? Story 49. Being led into a dark corner of the house by a family friend after a drinking session, and then being touched inappropriately as a boy. Story 50. We kept moving constantly across the country. Turned out we were losing our homes to the bank. It was hard to trust our parents when we discovered this. Story 51. I had to jump up and start appearing busy whenever my stepdad pulled into the driveway. If he caught me relaxing, watching television, reading, or even sleeping, I would be punished for being lazy. On days when he was home, if he was in a good mood, everything was fine, but if he was in a bad mood, I would receive the silent treatment, creating an atmosphere that was thick with tension. I often did something to annoy him just to get the punishment over with. He truly was difficult to deal with. Story 52. Being Generation X in the era of missing children's faces being plastered on milk cartons. Think about it. Here we were, the generation raised by the baby boomers, told to go outside until the streetlights came on at dusk. So we all ventured into the wide world for the majority of the day when there was no school. But before that, we had our morning bowl of cereal, forced to stare at the faces of those who didn't make it back home. The utter morbidity. Story 53. Being bullied, body shamed, and harassed at school was psychologically damaging and traumatic, but the adults treated it as a normal part of growing up. Story 54. My mom would discipline us with a fly swatter. We would take it in stride, thinking, here she comes with the craziness. Years later, while talking with my older sister, I questioned what that was all about. My sister looked at me for a moment before saying it was because our school called about the bruises when we were little, right? Story 55. My parents discussed financial worries in front of me, believing I was too unaware to understand their conversation. This made me feel financially insecure as an adult, even though I am actually fine. Additionally, teachers rewarding other children for bullying me was common in both elementary schools I attended. Story 56. How about things that seemed normal to most kids but were totally traumatic for me? I went to a birthday party where, as part of a game, they tied balloons to our ankles, and the last child whose balloon wasn't stomped won a prize. I hid in a corner for the rest of the party. Similarly, Jack-in-the-Boxes can be quite frightening, and whoever invented that perfection game, where you had to defuse a bomb before it went off in your 8-year-old face, should face consequences. Story 57. It might sound silly, but I was heavily involved in the hardcore and punk scenes as a teenager. I was in a band that played paid gigs and sold merchandise. I also had numerous band t-shirts from both larger and local bands. However, I got into some trouble with drugs when I was a teenager, and my parents believed it was because I was too morbid and interested in dark themes. They thought that by dressing the way I did, I attracted the wrong people. So, they collected all my shirts and put them in a garbage bag. My mom insists they were not thrown away, but I never saw them again. When they moved a couple of years ago, they didn't find any of them. My dad still has all his shirts from concerts in the 1970s and 1980s, and he cherishes them. I don't have that. For some reason, it still hurts to think about it sometimes. Story 58. Seeing a doctor every 2 months, being asked personal and invasive questions, being discussed as a defective individual, and enduring intimate examinations in the presence of my mother, a nurse, and a varying number of medical students was difficult. I mean, they saved my life and kept me somewhat healthy and functional, but it really messed me up, and I've only recently been able to deal with it. Now in my 50s. Story 59. My mom knocked my dad's motorcycle down with the station wagon while backing out of the driveway because she didn't see it. Apparently, it was my fault for not telling her it was back there. I was 3 or 4 years old, and I'm now 49. If they were in the room today, I would hear about that. I could barely reach the handle to open the door on the car. Another memory is when my dad came to see me in my 4th grade play and he fell, resulting in a minor ankle sprain. That was also my fault, and he wouldn't attend any more of my events. When I was 5, my mom took the glass out of the table to clean it, and it fell and broke. She spanked me for it, but then realized I was nowhere near it when it fell. She bought me ice cream to make it better. I took all of this to heart until a few years ago when I was in therapy, trying to understand why I take responsibility for everything that goes wrong. The neighbor's cat died? There was a tornado? You had a bad day? It's all my fault. I still struggle not to take the blame for everything. Story 60. I remember taking cold showers when I was sick as a young child, around 2 to 5 years old. If I vomited during the night, I would be taken to the shower and cleaned with ice-cold water. Story 61. Not being taken to the doctor when I was sick was a significant issue. When I was 15, I had a severe sinus infection that lasted several months before it went away on its own. It was incredibly unpleasant, and when I breathed in, the smell from my sinuses was like rotting roadkill. I also had ringworm go untreated for several months before I finally begged to see a doctor. Additionally, I felt unheard. I would talk to my mom, and she would often interrupt with unrelated topics. I was never read to. When I see parents now doing a whole nighttime routine, I feel jealous. I was simply told to go to bed, and that was the end of it. I also wasn't comforted when I was sad. I learned early on not to bother sharing my feelings with my parents because it seemed to not matter. My sisters and I were treated like ornaments around the house, just something to feed and send to bed, and that was it. Story 62. I was subjected to heavy drug use. My parents, grandparents, and 3 of my 5 siblings smoked crack every day. My alcoholic father was often suicidal, especially when drunk. I remember one incident when he tried to drown himself in the bathtub while I was bathing. I had to be taken to another room. Events like this were a regular occurrence. Story 63. I'm part of Generation X, so my entire childhood involved experiences like being spanked for even the slightest infraction and being left alone for hours to fend for myself at the age of 5. Story 64. Being constantly accused of things by my mother that I never did made me defensive as an adult. I had to learn that not everyone is attacking or criticizing me. I already struggle with recognizing passive aggressiveness, so I allow others to be more direct. Story 65. My parents were good parents. They just believed I was a hypochondriac. They convinced me of it to the point that I went into anaphylactic shock from an injection and told my mom, I know I'm a hypochondriac, but I think my throat is closing. I was 11. Turns out I never made anything up. I have a genetic condition. I still struggle to seek medical care for anything. Most recently, I spent months feeling crazy, as if my organs were too big, and finally went to the emergency room, where I was diagnosed with a 6-inch ovarian teratoma. I lost the ovary with the tumor. There have been many such instances in my adult life. Story 66. I was made to stand at the chalkboard and solve math problems by myself in front of the entire class. I froze. Everyone thought I was unintelligent, and that feeling lingered through high school. I experienced anxiety and struggled to think or move. It had nothing to do with being unintelligent. Story 67. I was recently told by friends that it was not normal for my mother to tell a suicidal 13-year-old me to hang myself in the tree in our backyard, so she wouldn't have to keep wasting money on me. It did not help my depression, and now I feel constantly guilty for being alive. Story 68. I am autistic, fairly high-functioning, but as a child, I had frequent meltdowns. The school's response was to evaluate my behavior daily on a scale of 1 to 5. Instead of helping me learn emotional regulation skills, they assigned a numerical value to my emotional responses, leaving me convinced that I was only considered good if I never cried or got upset. Story 69. Being yelled at for leaving a room after 2 hours of arguing about a holiday mistake, where they booked my ticket under the wrong name, was frustrating. There was nothing I could do at midnight. I also encountered situations where I tried to raise important issues, but they deemed them irrelevant and dismissed me. Naturally, these issues later turned out to be significant. Why didn't I insist on telling them? I have been unwell every Christmas and holiday, and while I was accused of overeating, the real reasons were autoimmune issues and myalgic encephalomyelitis/chronic fatigue syndrome. Story 70. I am loud. I'm sorry. I try to consciously manage myself, but it's just my default setting. My mom, a soft and quiet woman, hated this. Once, when I was around my friend hurt herself at the playground. Adults didn't even notice until 5 minutes later because she ran and hid, softly weeping behind the storage and bathroom building by the playground, and no one heard her. My mom looked down at me and asked, "Why can't you cry like that?" She basically said the way I cried and got upset was annoying. I still struggle to cry sometimes, even when I'm alone, because it's annoying. Oh, and also, the first time I was told to suck in my stomach, I wasn't even 10 yet, and it was my mom. So I did. For years. This is probably why I have so many stomach issues now. She really knew how to push the right buttons and make me feel worthless. Story 71. More like a teenage experience, when you are a silent and listening type of person, everyone ends up coming to you to vent and ask for advice, even if you have no idea or experience in how to deal with a situation. My mom did this too. She basically had me take on parental responsibilities unknowingly for both myself and her, even when she had issues with my dad. How was I supposed to know how to solve the issue that my father is an alcoholic? It took me years and a deep dive into my own depression, stemming from my own struggles and my parents' issues, to establish firm boundaries with my parents. I realized I needed to tell them to seek their own help because I needed to focus on helping myself or I wouldn't make it. A few years later, while discussing this situation with a psychologist, she expressed admiration for the clear boundaries I had set, noting that I had been parentified to a significant degree. Setting these boundaries ended up helping my mom receive the assistance she needed. My dad entered therapy, which saved their marriage and improved their relationship with me, likely even saving my dad's life. Story 72. Getting everything I owned except a pillow, blanket, and a change of clothes taken away and having to earn it back one item at a time. The longest it ever took to get it all back was a year, and my bed was normally the last thing I got back. Story 73. Mediating parents' arguments by physically intervening and trying to reason with them at a young age was unusual, and no child should have to experience that. I also recognized people by their footsteps before they entered the room. Story 74. Judging how the rest of the day would unfold based on how my parents closed the front door when they returned home from work. To this day, if anyone accidentally shuts the door louder than normal, I go on high alert. From ages 5 to 11, I was left with medication and a thermometer. One parent would call every 3 hours and ask about the temperature. Is it below 102 degrees or higher? If it was higher, they would say, "Okay, take 2 of those pills on the end table and go back to bed. I'll call back in an hour to see if it's gone down." Story 75. Telling your kids that if they don't behave in a restaurant, then a big burly stranger at the next table will take you away is not appropriate. What could happen? They may develop a deep mistrust of strangers or men. Alternatively, they may assume that their own parents wouldn't stop someone from taking them away for talking too loudly in public, leading to a profound mistrust in you. Story 76. 1. Living in fear of eternal punishment for self-exploration. Parents silencing you if they believe you are talking too much or making excessive noise. Being forced to sit on your hands if your parents think you are being too lively. Being made to say "yes, sir," and "yes, ma'am," out of supposed respect while your own basic humanity is disregarded. Story 77. When I attended gymnastics, my coach was very harsh. He would hit me on the head when I didn't perform well and force my body into positions that caused injuries. I still experience issues with my legs. When I informed my parents, they said it was normal and part of the sport, insisting that I needed to be strong if I wanted to continue. Story 78. My mom used to take hormone shots once a month. I didn't care what they technically were, but she would purposely put it off. I always knew when she needed it because she would get so angry and throw things. She got mad to the point of literally shaking with rage over me even speaking to her. I thought all moms had to take medication or they would get angry. The worst episode was when she was driving and started expressing how much she hated me and my sister, and how she felt about her life. She threatened to drive us off the road. I was 6 and my sister was 8. I still remember how fast she was going and how tightly she held the wheel, her hands turning white from the grip. My sister managed to stop her, and we just drove home without telling anyone, thinking, "There goes mom again." Story 79. Being raised in a church where I attended school, I went all 5 days and also attended Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, as well as Saturday, Sunday morning, and Sunday nights. I thought this was what everyone experienced. In 6th grade, I was placed in public schools and, because I was so sheltered, I had no idea how to interact with others. Kids can be cruel. This does not take into account the daily verbal, physical, and emotional abuse, which I also thought was normal. Story 80. I grew up in a family that wasn't rich but not poor either. We were firmly middle class, partly because my dad was extremely frugal and bought the cheapest version of everything. My mom ensured we always had birthday and Christmas presents and would take us to places like Chuck E. Cheese and McDonald's as an occasional treat. However, whenever she did these things, she would make comments like, "Other kids aren't as lucky to get this. I hope you enjoyed that. It wasn't cheap. You're so lucky that mom and dad love each other. You don't need to have 2 homes like the other kids at school." All seemingly innocent comments, but they instilled a sense of, you aren't broken enough to deserve anything. I felt constant guilt that my friends came from broken families while I didn't have to endure that kind of abuse. What makes me so special? It almost feels like survivor's guilt. I worked hard in school, built a decent career with a comfortable salary, and still feel undeserving. I struggle with hyperindependence and an unwillingness to accept gifts or help from others. It's taken a lot of therapy for me to accept that it's valid to have feelings of anxiety and depression. Story 81. That men disciplining their wives is normal is a misconception. Yelling is not helpful to a marriage, and constant arguing is not a constructive way to communicate. I watched my mother endure this for 24 years and experienced similar issues in my first marriage. I recognized that I was perpetuating a pattern in my family, so I left my first marriage. I found an opportunity and took it. I did not want my daughter to continue this pattern. Today, my mother, my daughter, and I are in healthier relationships. My mother realized that she does not need a man to find happiness. I married again, and we have been together for almost 22 years. My daughter met someone who understands her. She also realized that she does not need a partner. She wants a partner. This realization has made a significant difference in our perspectives. Story 82. Taking care of 3 younger siblings while my parents napped or went out and facing consequences if their expectations were not met. Story 83. I thought being alone a majority of the time was normal. The reality is I am so used to being left alone that I isolate myself and slowly lose my mind in a lonely spiral until I force myself to engage with others. I feel suspicious when people want to be friends with me. Why would anyone want to be friends with me? It must be a setup. I believed that was normal behavior for a very long time. It is pretty unhealthy, to be honest. Story 84. Learning to listen for the jingle of keys and how different people open doors. If it's a constant jingle, it's dad since he has many keys. If it's a jingle, silence, jingle, then it's mom. If someone is fumbling at the door, it's dad. If it goes right to the lock, it's mom. If it's her, you have 10 to 15 seconds to create some distance. She is looking for something wrong. If it's him, you have 30 to 40 seconds to create some distance, but he typically has tunnel vision and is focused only on sleep when he gets home, so you might be lucky too. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.